Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Shipp, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Shipp. Thank you so much for joining us today. Last week we talked to my husband, Patrick Shipp, giving the dad's perspective, and this week we're going to extend that conversation into part 2 of dad's perspective. So thank you again so much for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed last week's episode and we're able to get a little bit more perspective from the dad's point of view and not just mom's. So I'm just going to jump right into kind of some of the questions that we talked about, things that we want to talk about for dad's perspective. But so what are some of the things that you do to connect with Drayson? So, or would you give any golden nuggets of wisdom to maybe other dads out there that are really trying to find ways to connect? Because this was something that has been more of a constant struggle for you, I think, because just in past conversations you've said, I just want to connect with him. I can't connect to him, and that's been a big struggle for you. So what would you recommend?
Well, finding their interests. It's so easy for us to project our interest onto them and say, hey, like, don't you really want to do this? Like, this looks great. And then they have zero interest in it, and they sit there and they're pretty much miserable because it doesn't fall into their realm of interests. So, kind of just take time and sit back and kind of watch your kid and see what interests them. What are they into? What are they, watching on TV or on, YouTube or something? And once you kind of get that baseline of what they're interested in, and it may not be something that you're interested in, but now you have to kind of embrace that passion for them. And
probably because that the ultimate goal for you is to connect, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So
really,
and it's really it's a test, it's a trial and error process. Drayson loves trains, so once you again figure out that, hey, my kid, like I said, using Drayson for an example, he loves trains. Great. I'm going to go online and figure out like what's around the valley to see what we can do about looking at trains. And we found, a couple Arizona Railway Museum, and again, that's Drayson's probably favorite place to go. I don't think he's ever said no.
And we have more trains than we could possibly.
And we have tubs and tubs of trains.
Could we technically open our own toy train museum is probably what we could open at our house.
So, but again, that passion of theirs, ultimately could become a passion of yours as well. And different aspects of it. We've gotten Drayson, his toy trains and, try to, gauge the age appropriate, toys as well. We've gotten him a train set, like an HO gauge train set that he loves, playing with. And, again, visiting the places that he would enjoy, because then you get to enjoy it with him. And again, you establish that connection, with your child. And
have you found that has helped Drayson to open up to other ideas of other things eventually?
Eventually. Yeah. And again, if anybody knows, it's a process. It's not, you're not hitting it with a hammer, and being done with it one go. It is a marathon. It takes time. You got to pace. And again, every child is different on how they process things. Recently, we got Drayson a bicycle.
Yes.
And we got training wheels on it. But before, for a long time, we tried, the coaster bikes, the pedalless bikes, coaster bikes. He had his own bike for a while, and he wanted zero to do
Nothing to do with
it.
Nothing
to do with it. And I love riding, my bike, riding my mountain bike. And so again, if I can get him interested in bike, maybe down the road, it would just lead us to be able to go ride down the road together, just get out, get some exercise, do something that's fun, that's a little bit out of the ordinary for him, and kind of go down that route. So, like I said, for a long time, we tried to get Drayson on a bike, and he just wanted nothing to do with it. And then one day we were, it was raining out. We'd gone to breakfast. We're like, hey, let's go to Walmart, because he loves Legos. That's another thing, he loves building things with Legos. And said, hey, let's go over to Walmart and look for a Lego set that we could build while it's raining outside, because obviously we can't go outside and do anything. And so we're sitting there, and the Lego sets at Walmart just happened to be right next to, lo and behold, the bicycle section.
Yeah.
And so his shift went from looking for a Lego set. He walked over to a small bike, sat on it, which of course me and Nikki were like, what's he doing? I don't know.
Yeah,
why is he sitting on a bike? I never would have
Yeah.
expected him to sit on a bike. So then of course we took the initiative on that and kind of kept the momentum and said, hey, let's, the bike that he had sat on was not the right size for him. But so we said, hey, let's go over and look at the bikes that are your size. And he walked over and found a bike, and this one didn't have training wheels, but he stood on, he sat down on it, and he looked at me and said, Dad, push me. And I was just
floored,
shocked. I looked at Nikki, Nikki looked at me, and I'm like, all right. So I spent the next
we're in Walmart, and I'm like, push him down the aisle.
20 minutes, I'm pushing him up and down the aisle with a bike on, and he's like, wee, and he's having such a good time. And, at the end, we kind of looked at each other, and we're like, again, we just need to work on we needed to keep this momentum going. So his birthday was coming up in a couple weeks, and, it was kind of an early birthday gift. And so we asked him, hey, Drayson, would you like a bike? Would you like this bike? And he was like, okay, and Drayson's just, nonchalantly like, okay.
But it took years for him to develop.
It took years all of a sudden. I mean, like, where did this come from,
Right.
And so we bought a bike that day, and, and we actually, when we got out of the back of the truck, he jumped on it, and I let him pick out a helmet, and we got home. Like I said, I pulled out of the back of the truck, and.
But I think it's finding, like you were saying, though, finding what their interests are. And would you say, though, that for you, at least it has been for me, like, I have no interest in, obviously, like trains or Legos or those types of things, but having to open myself up to just being open-minded about that, right? And I guess in some ways, like, for me, it was learning about new things and being open to learning new things. For you, was it something that, like, did you struggle with that at all, or was it, no, I feel comfortable, I want to be open-minded, I just want to connect with him? That is what meant more than the actual activity itself.
It's a little bit of a struggle.
Right.
But if anybody knows, it's not our world anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And
again, that goes back to that very first, conversation after the diagnosis and stuff, was like, it's no longer our world. It's Drayson's world, and so, again, you have to adapt to that environment. You have to be open-minded and ready to adapt. You can't just force things down their throat that interest you. You really have to be able to connect. It really requires you to be flexible. And
we've exposed Drayson to lots of other things that we didn't know.
We've tried to be
if you like it or not. Yeah,
try to be very open-minded about things. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. And even it comes in phases. There's some times where, Drayson absolutely loves Star Wars. Yes. And he will watch all the movies from number 1 to the very end, and he'll do that for
weeks,
2 weeks, and then all of a sudden, like, Dad wants to watch Star Wars. I'll be like, hey, let's watch Star Wars, and he's like, no thanks, not today.
Yeah.
You're like, all right. So it comes in repetitive waves, back and forth. So you just have to be ready to adapt to that. And
would you say, though, to still would you encourage other parents out there to still expose them to new things, new possibilities?
Yeah,
to see?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, it takes a little bit of finesse, and you don't want to, like, necessarily force them to do something, but kind of, use the mind trick that it's their idea. Or like it's going to be just a quick run around the block, like said a couple times I think last spring break, we were down in Tucson, and we took our dog down there with us. And I said, hey, Drayson, we're going to go for a ride in the truck. And I ended up going to a trailhead, and me and Drayson went for like a real short hike. It was like a 2-3 mile hike up into a canyon and back. But was he ready for that? No.
And sometimes that varies. Like sometimes we can't do that. It's not just it's I think it's knowing when to gauge that too, because sometimes we have to really prep him so that way he's prepared. If we sidewall him with it, then there's a behavior or a tantrum or something that usually occurs.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on the situation with that.
It depends on the situation. Again, and as well, like trying to get him out of his comfort zone. But
so what advice would you have for parents to, I guess, be more involved with their child's development? Like, what would you recommend, or what advice would you give to other parents on how to be more involved with their child's development?
Just be there. Like don't let the other spouse take the brunt of everything. Be there and offer support. And be willing to step in when it's needed is huge. Because, again, the more that you're involved, the more that you're going to learn. And the more that you're going to learn, the more that you're going to evolve as a better parent, in the situation. So that, again, it just provides another level for your child to, have those resources and have those services and that quality of life that we want at the end.
And what about specifically for dads, for fathers? What advice would you give to maybe a dad that maybe they're going through the process and their child, they might be facing this type of diagnosis? What more specifically to, I guess, dads, because, I've given so much advice over this past year as a mom, the mom's perspective, but what advice do you have for fathers out there that maybe have a newly diagnosed child or facing an autism diagnosis?
I would say put your pride to the side. Put your pride to the side. Again, there's that grieving process, but when you're ready, put your pride to the side and be willing to open up and be and participate and do that. I've seen some instances where some newly diagnosed dads are in this state of denial, and that not only hurts them because it takes a long time.
And we've seen that with moms too. It's not just dads, but
and I think sometimes
subject, I guess.
and again, from a dad's perspective, I think a lot of times like dads have this preconceived notion of what they're going to do with their kid. The things that they want them to see accomplish, and then all of a sudden their life takes this change, and those ideas get kind of thrown out the window, and all of a sudden you're kind of like, hey, I had this plan already set up. Like, I know my kid's going to go do X, Y, Z, and we're going to accomplish X, Y, Z, and they're going to go on and do this and this, and obviously all those things that we want our child to accomplish. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to accomplish things, but it just might be in a different order or in a different level.
Different level, yeah.
And so again, the biggest thing I think is put your pride to the side as a dad and accept the situation, and then really dive in and try to educate yourself. Don't become that distant parent or that resentful parent, that resentful dad that is like, well, I can't do anything with my kid anymore because, he's not able to do this or that. You as an adult and as a parent and as a dad, it's up to you to find those things. And
it's a responsibility, I think, too, to some degree.
It is.
Yeah.
And again, you're not going to be successful 100% of the time. You might have some tantrums that are thrown or, some pushback. And that's just part of the learning process to say, well, this worked. This is great. I'm going to put this back in my file, and hopefully this will work again later.
And would you say that for you, the focus of just really unconditionally loving Drayson for who he is kind of what always has to stay as the underlining reason to keep going.
Yeah, it's your child.
Right.
It's your kid. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're the 4.5 GPA student, and valedictorian, or if they're on the spectrum and they go to an alternate school and you have to kind of curve your life around that. But
it
again,
definitely changes the definition of success, I think. What we idolize or what we imagine success to be for our kids, it's just there's still a lot of successes with Drayson, wouldn't you say? It's just different than what we thought it was.
We gauge ours in small victories
all the time.
Like we some of the things that we like high five each other for, and we're like, holy cow, or things that Drayson says and does that floor us, that we tell our friends and family. Sometimes they look at us and they're like,
cool.
Okay. You don't know, you don't get it. Like, we've been working on this.
Well, how long did it take us to get to that point where,
like, we have this, like, victory. It's a huge victory. I mean, even though it's a small thing, it's a huge victory for us because, again, we're living that life day in, day out of, dealing with, with whatever it is that, that's there. And so when those times come and we're like, holy cow, like, that was awesome, it might be something trivial and small for regular parents and family, I guess.
Yeah.
But again, we come across that and we were like, like I get teary-eyed, I get a little emotional, on things. And
I think it makes you not take things for granted too.
Yeah.
I mean, things that we have lots of other friends and family that, and it by no fault of their own, but, they'll start talking to us or complaining about, my kid's, not playing baseball well or not doing this well. And, almost like that competitive drive. And we're like, yeah, our kid got dressed today and like brushed his teeth, like, woohoo! Right. Like that's a big deal for us. And so it's like those little smaller scale things that just even taking care of yourself daily are a big deal in our household versus, the push and the drive, maybe just because we want him to perform better playing a sport or, some other example like that. But I think we've
taken some of those things for granted.
Yeah. And I think we've experienced that. And, and again, not to displace that for other people because that's their struggle with what they're struggling with at that point in time. But for us, it's always hard when you hear those things because you're like, right? I mean, I feel that way sometimes. They took the driving test and they didn't pass the first time and da-da-da-da. And their, parents get all worked up. And we're like, oh, you'll just take the test again. Oh, they should have studied. They should have da-da-da-da. And I'm like, yeah, what do I have for that? Like,
I got my kid to
I
be on a bicycle
in the car today. Like, that was a huge
I got my kid
deal.
on a bicycle with with training wheels on it.
Yeah,
today.
I got him in the car and actually to put his seatbelt on independently by himself. I think that there's a little bit of at least for you and I, our sense of appreciating more of the little things has definitely come into play over the years versus the bigger, maybe what you would consider more of a monumental moment. I think has been much smaller scale for us in terms of what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to add too is get down on their level.
Yeah.
Get down on their level and become a kid again.
Yeah.
I've become the best friend to an 11-year-old. So sometimes, when there's Amazon packages that arrive and, I say, hey, look at this, Drayson. Nikki goes, is that more for you or is that for Drayson? I was like, but we can both play with it,
There's a lot of lightsaber fights and Nerf
we
gun
have
fights.
Nerf gun fights and stuff like that just spontaneously erupt in the house. But we have to seize that moment when it happens.
Yeah.
Because we don't know when that next moment's going to happen with Drayson, Yeah. I mean, a couple weeks ago, and I don't know if you had told the story about the Nerf gun fight.
I mentioned it earlier, in the past episode, but
Drayson loves Mario Brothers, and we've got a Wii, and the basic Mario Brothers is on the Wii, and I'm trying to get him to play that, and we're sitting here, kind of going back and forth, and he's kind of losing interest, but here I am playing old school Mario Brothers, but then next thing I know, I see a Nerf dart go fly by my head, and I look over and I realize Drayson had dug into his toy box and had pulled out all of the Nerf guns, and the lightsabers,
Yes.
Again, Drayson's not super known for playing with Nerf guns.
No, not at all.
And, but the lightsabers, are part of the Star Wars thing, but then all of his Nerf guns are Star Wars Nerf guns. But then the dart goes flying by my head, and then literally it just erupted into this like huge Nerf battle, lightsaber battle, and running up and down the stairs and like getting out of breath and laughing hysterically. Like that's what it's really about, like creating those moments.
And being willing to drop other things. And, like, don't worry about the laundry. Don't worry about the dishes.
Right.
Don't worry about, because that's the mode I tend to go into. Like, oh my gosh, I got to clean the house. I got to do this. I got to do that. And they're running around playing. And I'm like, I need to get the laundry done. And sometimes you'll even come to me and be like, honey, he's playing right now. And it literally is, we're going to stop what we're doing and engage in that moment with him, because there could potentially be a teachable moment for him in there.
And I think over time that we've learned that, when those moments happen, to really seize that moment.
Yeah.
And try to take advantage of it the most that we can, because again, we don't know, there might be some kind of conversation or some utterance or something that he hasn't done that we've been working on that's gonna come to light, that he's gonna say something and we're like, holy crap, like that was awesome. Like, and there's been times and a lot of it requires me to kind of take a step back and be humble and watch Drayson just develop. And again, I think just makes me as a better dad, to kind of put that, my other things to the side and just kind of focus on Drayson and let him, become his own person with his own personality and his own little quirky traits and stuff that he does.
Right. So before we wrap up, what advice would you give for parents if they're struggling to not just connect with their child, but they're really internally, emotionally struggling with the situation or a situation of a diagnosis or potential diagnosis? What else could parents do? I mean, you and I have really worked really hard on communication within our marriage, and that's something that I've talked about in past episodes as well. Is your marriage strong enough? And our line of communication is very open. What advice would you have for parents other than that if they're just really struggling? Like, if I couldn't get you out of that headspace, I can't help you get out of that headspace.
Right.
Like, so what would you recommend for parents that maybe are struggling? Because you and I have seen that quite a bit too. Yeah.
Not being afraid, don't be afraid to open up. And again, whatever your situation is, there's nothing wrong with to go see a counselor, or search out, dad groups, and to get a perspective on, from other dads that are in that position or other parents, find that support. It's, that level of support, and like I said, luckily between me and Nikki, we kind of made that decision at the very beginning that whatever it takes, and again, there's days where Nikki has good days, there's bad days. Same with me. I've got good and bad days, but we know that we have each other there to kind of bounce off of and, open up if we need to and just be, open and say, hey, I'm being frustrated, or what's frustrating you? Oh, man, I just, and there are days where I'm just like, today's not the day and I'm not the dude. I got to step away from Drayson for a minute, and I'm getting this kind of, preteen hormonal 11-year-old teenage, preteen, kid. And I'm like, all right, you are really testing my inner gangster today. So, like I'm going to hand you off to mom. Hopefully mom can, and I will be back, because you will have days, where you just need to kind of step away, and that's okay. Like you can't be immersed in that.
And not have any emotion.
And not have any emotion over it, because again, I will be the first one to admit, there's times where I do get angry with Drayson, but it's a different type of angry, I think, where I just have to kind of dial myself back. I have to take a step back. I have to look at the whole total picture, say, okay, like this is something that I don't have control of, or Drayson doesn't have, control over. So.
And would you say that, too, like just talking, like we've talked to the care team quite a bit, our in-home care team. would you encourage parents also to talk to their providers about what their frustrations are or what they need help with? Because sometimes, like there's been times where we've been in care team meetings and we're just venting. We're just venting and that's it. And they're like, oh, well, we can write a goal around that, whatever our frustration is. Like if there's a certain behavior that oftentimes we find that we can rely on our care team to maybe help with a goal that could help with that behavior, but then also help us to alleviate some of that. So I love the fact that you said too, to talk to a counselor or talk to maybe seek professional help if you feel like you need it. But I also think you can also talk to the care team. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because your care team has a different set of eyes and perspective on what's happening. Like, because again, we're immersed 24/7, 365 days. They have the ability to kind of step out, put that bird's eye view on what's going on, see a different solution that we might, we're banging our heads against the wall like, okay, I think I've expended every avenue that I can to get them to do this, and it's just not working. But then they go, well, what about this? And it's something that you probably didn't think of, or you're just kind of running in circles. And all of a sudden you're like, yeah, oh my, like that would totally make sense, So again, always, don't be afraid to open up, obviously, with your care team as well, because again, they're the ones that are going to be they're writing the goals. They understand it from maybe a more of a clinical side of it versus a parental side of it,
and
they can
more objectively,
and they can look at it more objectively. And kind of take a little bit of that emotion out of it. Like I said, our care team is awesome. Like we've had some pretty good luck with our care team and have providers and people that have come into our life and been working with Drayson. And it takes a village,
It does.
And we didn't really realize that village, what that village was going to look like.
No idea what that tribe was going to look like. Yeah.
Until we started kind of going down that route, and we've had HAP providers that have become kind of part of our family, that have just loved Drayson, and anybody who gets to know Drayson or is around him a lot, I mean, he's just the sweetest kid that you could possibly imagine. Now, granted, sometimes he has his moments, but every teacher, every HAP provider that we've had, every person, we're like, we just absolutely love working with Drayson. He's kind of our favorite. So
what has Drayson taught you?
Patience.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had one word, just patience.
Yeah.
And I can use that in my everyday life.
Yeah.
Where I can take a step back now and be like, okay, what am I looking at? Is it worth getting this worked up and upset over? And again, just be patient. I mean, it really does.
Would you trade any of it?
No.
That's such a loaded question for his wife to ask him, isn't it? Would you trade any of it?
I wouldn't, because Drayson...
Look at what you signed up for.
I think Drayson's made me a better person.
Yeah,
me
too.
Because everybody can have the regular family. We're just not that regular family.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, he's kind of my hero.
Yeah. Yeah. I pegged you, didn't I? You didn't know I was going to ask you that question. Yeah.
You did.
Where's the tissue?
He's my buddy.
So, yeah.
If I'm sitting on the couch or even if he's sitting at the table, I can walk by and, give him a hug or, have that moment with him. But
that's awesome.
He's definitely
He is.
My little guy.
He is your little guy. Well, folks, this concludes our episode for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're partially ending this episode today so I don't start crying at you. But thank you, honey, so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate it. And for all you dads out there, I hope it gave you some more perspective just from a guy point of view. But this concludes our episode for today. If you have any questions or comments or maybe even some topic that you would like to hear on our show, feel free to send me an email at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. Feel free to like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. And if you like what you're hearing, please spread the word so we can create more awareness and maybe help more families and friends out there that are looking for resources or just even encouragement and inspiration. And this concludes our episode for today. So until next time, keep working on your puzzle. And remember, you don't have to have it all solved in a day. Take care.